Okay. This is after Pesach. And we are starting on a new foot, a new vigor. We're just climbing out of Metzoirah, and we're starting to move on. And in today's Parsha, with an explanation and insight of the Rebbe, we have a tremendous illumination, tremendous insight as to what it means to move on. You know that the Parsha of the week is Parshas Tazriah and combined with Metzoirah, two Parshiyos. These two Parshiyos, Tazriah and Metzoirah, very, very often come together. They join very often, more than not. Parshas Tazriah begins speaking about the birth of a child, and then right after the first few psukim, it goes on to speak about the Metzoirah. I'm sure you all learned the various tzaras and the simonim, what make him toher, what make him tomei, and so forth. So basically you could say that the overwhelming majority of the Parsha is not talking about the initial starting point of the Parsha, which is giving birth. And the word Tazriah actually means that she will conceive and give birth. And the majority of the Parsha, the overwhelming majority of the Parsha, is not talking about that at all. And that immediately brings up the question, according to the principles that the Rebbe explained to us, that the name of the Parsha is representative of the entire Parsha. Not just the beginning, but representative of the entire Parsha. What is the relationship? It seems to be opposites. The beginning of the Parsha is giving birth, a new child. The majority of the Parsha speaks about the Metzoirah. And we know that Metzoirah is not only Tomei, that he cannot go enter the Beit HaMikdash and so forth. The tumah of the Metzoirah is the most severe tumah that there is in a living human being. He is compared to a mess, to a lifeless body. A Metzoirah enters a room, everything in the room becomes tumah. There's no other tumah like that, except for a mess. And as a matter of fact, the Gemara does say that Metzoirah choshev kemeis. Metzoirah is considered like a mace. And his way of life that he continues until he gets cured from his condition is that he is, as I mentioned, not only that he is not permitted to come into a holy place, into Beit HaMikdash, he's not permitted to be within society. He has to live out beyond city limits. He can't live within a city. Completely banished. And then, even further than that, in his banished abode, he cannot join together with other Metzoirah. They have to each live separately. That's a requirement in the Torah. Bodod Yeshiv, he has to be mamash alone. The opposite of life, participating in life, which is presented in the beginning of the Parsha, of the Seder. Then when you go further to the next parsha, the next seder, which is called Metzoirah. That parsha is called Metzoirah, and what does it speak about? What is the very beginning of the parsha speak about? How a Metzoirah becomes Toher. Just the opposite of being a Metzoirah. That when he is cured and he is now ready to become Toher, he goes to the Kohen, and the Kohen examines him, and he sees that he has been cured, and now he is ready to become Toher, and then the whole process begins until he is permitted to come back into the Beis Hamikdash. That's the Parsha Metzoirah. And that's called Metzoirah. It seems to be lopsided. To explain this, there is another profound point made by the Alter Rebbe in the Likutei Torah. The Alter Rebbe asked a question: how come in our parsha, in Parshas Tazriah, when the Torah begins to speak about a Metzoirah, it introduces it by saying Odom. Odom, a man, ki yiyeh v'oir b'soroi, seis es apachas b'heres. A man will have on his skin, some kind of a discoloration. Seis es apachas b'heres. And the question is, all of a sudden we're referring to the person, not like commonly in the Torah it's called Ish. Another time that the word Odom is used in the Torah to refer to a Yidden is when it talks about a korban. Odom ki yakriv mikem korban l'Hashem. Because the word Odom, the reference to a person, a Yid, when the word Odom is the most complimentary. What complimentary means? The most honorable, the highest form of reference is Odom. There are four references, four ways that a human being is called, that a Yid is called. Odom, Ish, Gever, and Enosh. Enosh is the weakling, is the one who is weak even in his midas. And then there is Gever, Ish, one who is strong in midas, and Odom. Odom is this intelligent, this powerful, this strong person. That's the highest title one can give to the human being. And here it talks about a Metzoirah, which means that this person has fallen down to a severe level, severe sickness, that he is Choshev Kimeis, and yet all of a sudden the Torah refers to him as Odom. And to this the Alter Rebbe explains that in fact what the Torah is telling us is that the whole inyan, this whole discoloration, this whole sickness of tzoras, of Metzoirah, really is an unnatural thing. And we could see this further down in the next week's parsha, not the next week, the next second parsha, the second half of the parsha, Metzoirah, where afterwards it speaks about a tzoras on the walls of a house, a tzaras on someone's clothes. Totally unnatural. And Mefoshim explained, and Ramban explains, that is really totally unnatural. And it's entirely created. This itself now, which is over Pele, it's a ness, this whole thing. And the ness is to reveal something and to teach the person something. That's what this whole Torah is. The Rambam explains this in a very orderly way, and he says that the whole thing of Torah is to bring a person to get him out of his doldrum, and get him out of his fall, and to cause him to elevate himself. And it starts off by attacking various external parts. First, the walls of his house. And he doesn't do tshuva, and he doesn't realize what the message is, then the house is brought down. And then, if he still hasn't realized that he has to pull himself up, and he hasn't corrected himself, so then it attacks his clothing. When his clothing are destroyed, and it's still not, then it starts going on his body, until he's sent out of the community, and there he sits until he recognizes what's going on, and then begins to come back.
Why then does it in the Torah it's in the opposite order? It begins with on the body and goes to the garments and leatherware and vessels and then it finishes with the house.
Very, very good question. I would think that the reason for that is that it is more common, more easily to understand, more easily to relate. What?
It touches home.
Yeah, then say a wall. Where's the wall begin to become sick? So the whole union of Metzoirah that the Torah speaks about is not really a straightforward natural disease. What is it? The Alter Rebbe explains that we are talking about a person who properly is described as Odom, meaning that he is that person who has reached the epitome, the highest levels of perfection that a human being can reach. He has perfected his entire self, his mind, his heart, and all his feelings and all his internal spiritual attitudes and experiences. There is some impurity left in this person, and this impurity is so minute and so insignificant that it shows up nothing. It doesn't affect any of his internals. It affects only his skin, only externally. It doesn't have anything to do with anything else. It's all on the skin deep. And now he has to get rid of this last vestige of impurity. And by getting rid of it, then he becomes rejuvenated. When leprosy is healed, then not only is it removed, but actually he is rejuvenated. His skin becomes pure and almost childlike. Like it says in Tanakh, there's a story of a Syrian general who was a leprotic, and through various channels, he went to the Novi Elisha, and the Novi Elisha told him he should dip in the Yarden, and after he dipped in the Yarden, he was completely cured, and it says that his flesh became like that of a child, of a young child, completely without any blemish, perfect. And this is what the Torah is telling us over here. Odom. Once a person is Odom, and he's reached this point, then on his skin of his flesh may appear. Any impurities that are left will appear on his skin. And now he has to go through a process of purification. In other words, this whole episode of Metzoirah is not an indication of deep sickness, and it's not for the purpose of punishment. It is a process that facilitates rejuvenation, coming to youth. And this explains how this is related to the name of the Pasha. The name of the Pasha is Isha Ki Tazriah V'Yoldo Zocher. And she gives birth to a new baby. And this is in a person's life, the Tzoras represents the similar thing. That when he reached perfection and he has to break through and come to a point of ultimate perfection, like that of birth, then there is this whole process of Tzoras. So this explains the name of the Seder Ki Tazriah, how that incorporates and relates very well to the whole union of being a Metzoirah. And then the next Pasha is called Metzoirah, and it speaks about the healing process when after he had healed and he's coming back to the Beis Hamikdash, because in fact that is the ultimate meaning of a Metzoirah, the ultimate purpose of the Metzoirah. That he comes back and is elevated back and is brought back into the community, not only into the community but into the Beis Hamikdash and so forth. So the Torah says, what is a Metzoirah? In other words, what is the purpose and the meaning and the reason for bearing the Metzoirah? Is that he should become purified and come back into the holy fold. The Gemara says that Mashiach is called Metzoirah. I don't know if any one of you heard it before. Mashiach is called Metzoirah because Mashiach, he completes the process of the purification of the world. It's called Ikvos in the Mashiach, the hills of Mashiach, the very last moments that are left that still need some degree of purification, some degree of elevation. That's Mashiach. That's why he's called a Metzoirah. At the time of Mashiach, which is, as you know, is our time, the evil that's left is only that is represented by the word Metzoirah. That it is only the external and superficial aspect that's left to be corrected. There is more in that Sikha, certain details that the Rebbe points out, but I would like to spend more time discussing how this is reflected, what this means to us, how this is reflected in our own Aveda. Here we see, tells us, the Torah tells us, that when a person reaches the whole madrega of Odom, then first he realizes, you know what? I have a tzaras. Before he becomes an Odom, he would not become a Tzaras. He's a healthy, good looking, everything is nothing, there's no discoloration, everything is perfect. You looked at him externally, everything is perfect. When he reached this person, this level of Odom, all of a sudden all kinds of things begin to surface. He becomes a Tzarua. He has to be sent out of the house, sent out of the community. It's a horror story. It's Choshev Kimeis. This reflects very directly and very clearly the process of a person's pneumistic internal growth, an internal labor. When one first starts off, when one, let's say, comes to the yeshiva, and he found out about Yiddishkeit. And what is Yiddishkeit? He's supposed to daven 3 times a day, put on tefillin, keep Shabbos, eat kosher, and you can learn Torah. Everything seems to be quite easily accessible, and I can relate to it quite simply. It's not such a difficult thing. I can understand all of that. And he comes in, and it seems to him that he'll become a perfect Yid within a relatively short time. He'll just get there. Just a question of learning certain things. Okay, so I won't know as much as somebody else, but that doesn't put me in any different category. Learning, what can be difficult about learning? I have a good head, I'll learn, I'll understand it. No sooner does he enter the 4 walls of the yeshiva and he starts learning, and then he begins to feel certain sensitivities. This doesn't really make sense. I can't really relate to this. It's a little difficult. And what does it mean that I'm giving up the world? What does it mean? How can I never thought of it. The world is the reality that I grew up in. All of a sudden, he begins to become sensitive to things that he never paid attention to. He thought it'll just go a smooth sail. And then, the more he learns, the more sensitive he becomes. At first, he is told, look, you come into yeshiva, you become a frum Yid, you become a Hashem Torah mitzvah, there's certain foods that you can't eat. Okay, no tragedy, I can be without them. But then, as he's in yeshiva a little longer, he realizes it's not just certain foods you can't eat. But before you eat, you have to wash your hands. And when you wash your hands have to be very specifically and very strictly clean. And that you have to make a bracha. And before you take any food, you have to know what bracha to make. This becomes already a burden. And then, as time goes on, he realizes that there's more to that. There's much more to that. You have to eat b'derech eretz. You can't eat on the run. It's suddenly Shulchan Aruch, you're not allowed to eat while you're walking in the street. What do you mean? I enjoy walking in the street and eating. The more that one learns, and the higher one rises, the more sensitive he becomes to what's going on. As a matter of fact, After he's in yeshiva for a while, he feels, oh, it doesn't seem right to walk in the street and eat. Doesn't seem right. And look what I am, I'm so used to it. And that becomes my Metzoirah. That becomes my impurity. Oh, what a despicable, lowly creature I am. I eat in the street, it's so not nice. This is all simple things. And the more one learns, the more one gets an influence and gets an insight in Torah, and Yiddishkeit, and Chassidus, the more he identifies, he recognizes traits. You know what traits means? Traits, personal qualities, traits. Huh? Internal traits, natures, that he looks at himself and he says, I can't stand myself. I never believed that I have these kind of lowly traits. And as time goes on, he starts eating at himself and saying, instead of growing, instead of becoming a better person, I seem to be becoming a worse person. I'm going down. I'm identifying such things that I never had. And there's a new battle coming up, surfacing almost daily. I'm identifying, I have jealousy in myself. I never knew I was jealous. I was a jealous person. I thought I was a perfect good guy. All of a sudden I see that, no, I have some jealousy in me. All kinds of midas, all kinds of attitudes that he was never related to. He never thought that it was possible, and he has it.
Why did they show up so suddenly?
Why did they show up all of a sudden? The closer he becomes to becoming an Odom, the more finer things begin to surface. Before that, he wasn't sensitive to it. He wasn't sensitive. Eating in the street, it's a pleasure. Doesn't bother me. I'm sorry? Sensitive. To sweet food, right. He doesn't sense it, doesn't feel anything. I used to walk around in the street in shorts, short pants, without socks, running in the street. It didn't bother me. I was perfectly well dressed. Now, all of a sudden, this is impossible. This is disgusting. This is not a process, as a shalom, of going down. When one identifies its oras, a superficial thing that he has to deal with, whether it's jealousy or taiva, he enjoys a certain, he likes to eat a lot, or he likes to eat with both his hands, all kinds of different midas that a person has, and he has to handle it, he has to teach himself decent and respectable manners and human traits. This is first coming up because he's coming closer to becoming an Odom. This is not a reflection. It's not a retraction. It's not a falling down. It's an indication of rising up. We spoke about this a while ago, and you learned, I'm sure, in Tanya. The Alter Rebbe explains the pasuk that says, Sheva Yipol Tzadik V'kom, that a tzaddik falls 7 times, he would fall, and then he would still rise up. Did you learn that? Not yet. That even a tzaddik, also has his ups and downs. Also falls down and rises up. And the Alter Rebbe explains that this process that a tzaddik has, that he falls and rises, the fall itself, the reason that he falls is because he is rising. It isn't that he is falling down and then has to climb up again. The fall is because he is rising. What that means is that I'll give you a simple illustration, then we'll go back to the tzaddik. A baby, first, its early movement is by crawling. By crawling. First it crawls clumsily, and after a while it becomes an expert crawler. You know what crawling means? Crawling. That's an expert. He can get around quickly as somebody else walking. Poo, 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 and he's there. Becomes an expert crawler. Then he grows a little bit and becomes smarter. And he doesn't want to crawl anymore, he wants to walk. When he starts walking, all of a sudden, every step is an effort. And he's balancing, and he's falling every second step. He has to be held up. And he falls down and hurts himself. And he says, what happened over here? I was perfect. I can get around without any problems. All of a sudden, I can't take a first step. So you tell him, you know what? Why don't you go back to crawling? Oh no, I'm not going back to crawling. I want to walk. You don't want back to crawling? He walks, and he walks much slower with much more effort than crawling, and also with much more risk, and he will get hurt, and he will cry, but he is going to go on with it, because he has grown up. He's too smart for crawling. There's a story of the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe, when he got married into a very, you can imagine, a very prestigious, wealthy family. He was a very young man. I think he was 15 years old, I don't know exactly. But he was a great, great Gaon, and everybody knew his greatness. And this wealthy individual also Talmid Chacham and he wanted this Eidim. He chose him for an Eidim, for a son-in-law. And he promised him that he could sit and learn without any disturbance, as long as he wants. And gave him caste, and he was very comfortably situated, and sat and learned. Then, a couple of years later, the Alter Rebbe went to Mizrich, as you know. He went to Mizrich Magid. And he came back and he became a Chassid. And this business of becoming a Chassid disturbed his father-in-law tremendously. And to the extent that he was urging his daughter that she should ask for a get. But by that time, his daughter knew who the Alter Rebbe was, and she refused. She won't hear of it. But the Alter Rebbe lived in their house, and they did everything to annoy him, to make his life miserable. The Alter Rebbe used to come home Friday night very late. He used to sit and he had davened to learn whatever he did. He came home very late. So one time, his father-in-law decided he's going to teach him a lesson. He hid behind the lock, locked up all the dishes, all the cups and all the wines, everything. His son-in-law is going to come home, he's not going to have what to make Kiddush on. Not to teach him a lesson. The Alter Rebbe came home, and the Rebbetzin was crying to him. She said she can't find anything. She can't find anything to make Kiddush. So they searched up and down. Finally, they found a barrel of whiskey. And whiskey is not the primary ingredient for Kiddush. For Kiddush, you have to make on wine. But if there is nothing else, you can make Kiddush on whiskey.
Wasn't 96?
Huh?
It wasn't 96 vodka?
I don't know. It wasn't Smirnoff. So, and then you have to find a keli, a cup. They're all cups. So they found some a huge container, and Kiddush, you have to fill it up, and when you fill it up, and you have to drink roif kos, more than half of the cup. Anyways, the Alter Rebbe make Kiddush, and he drank more than this cup. And then you have to have Kiddush Bokim Suda. Because Kiddush is not enough, you have to eat something, but there was nothing to eat. So the din is that if you have nothing to eat, you can drink another cup of wine. Huh? Another cup. So he drank another cup of the whiskey also for the Kiddush. Okay, this was his Kiddush, this was his Suda. And then he sat down to learn. Like the Alter Rebbe usually does. In the morning, his father-in-law found out what happened. How did the Alter Rebbe get around this problem? And he said to his daughter, no, after that he probably slept well. He said, no, he didn't sleep, he went to learn. That kind of hit him. Oh, there must be something unusual about this young man. After drinking a barrel of whiskey and to sit the whole night to learn, that there's something special. Anyway, just as to illustrate, the point which I want to make is this. They made his life so miserable that he moved out of the house. He moved to the next town, to Lozna. After that, the Alter Rebbe became a Rebbe, and he became known to be this great man. At that time, his father-in-law had passed away, and only his mother-in-law was there. She was a wealthy widow. So she now went to him, sent him and asked him to come back, and she will support him, in luxury. She wouldn't have to worry about anything. So the Alter Rebbe answered her like this. He said, when a baby is in the womb, it's very comfortable. It's very comfortable. In the womb, in the belly, in the mother's belly. It has no worry about eating, sleeping. It's got everything set, everything is very comfortable. When the baby comes out and is born, it cries, it screams. Why? Because he was so comfortable in being disturbed. He's coming out into this big wide world, and now he all of a sudden he doesn't have all that support, and so it becomes disturbed. So then, if you come to the baby at that time and say, okay, you're not happy over here, go back into the womb. Go back into the belly. The baby says, no, I'm not going back. I'm not going back. I'm too big for going back, and the place became too small for me. The point is that there is a growth It can be very comfortable. And then when it comes out, it's not comfortable at all. But this comfort is superior, is better than the comfortable place that we were before. That's the process of growth. And this is what the Alter Rebbe says. Tzaddik also falls down. But why does he fall? Because he's ready to go to the next step. Before you go to the next step, you fall down from the previous step. It's not a fall. It's a step upwards. The same thing happens to us, ordinary people. We are not tzaddikim, we are simple people. But we also grow, we also learn. And we grow physically and we also grow spiritually and intellectually. There has to be a process of growth. You don't always remain a child, always remain a fool. You have to grow and become an intelligent person, a responsible person. It's easier to remain a child and to remain a fool and to make a fool of yourself. But that's not what you want. You want to go to the next step, and that becomes responsible, and you make mistakes. Why? Before, when I was a child, I never made any mistake. Everything I did was good. My parents always said, you're a good boy. All of a sudden, I'm making mistakes. I'm not good. This no good is a step in the right direction. That is a step in the right direction. And the more a person grows, the more sensitive and more recognized. He recognizes the finer things, the finer errors. These finer errors, more subtle errors, not such obvious mistakes, more fine, more refined. These are important. These are important. This is in the process of becoming an Odom. And this is what gives birth to a new child. You know, for instance, you all know Kriya, how to lay in the Parsha, in the Trop. You can say the Parsha correctly, but it's a totally different thing to say it perfectly. You know, and put the Trop in the right syllable. Not just have the right Trop on the right word, but in the right syllable. Syllable.
Chest forward on it.
Yeah, just like section of the word. That's what you have. Right? That's important. And that's what makes the real reading. And you don't become sensitive to it until you first learn the basics. Then it makes a big difference. The same thing is in everything that you learn in Tanya. You learn a piece of Gemara. When you first start, these things don't bother. Now, well, I want to know exactly what this word means, or why it's here, and what's the difference between this and this. These are all things which didn't bother you half a year ago, and now it really bothers you. Does this mean you've fallen down? No, it doesn't mean that. It means, on the contrary, you're growing up. And the most important thing, as I mentioned earlier, are the personal qualities. We have to pay attention to our personal qualities. You have to pay attention to our midas. To our midas. We have to pay attention. If we have a tendency for jealousy, we have a tendency for gaiva, we have a tendency for taiva, whatever it is, we have to know that these are things we have to attend to. This is the tzoras that's on top of the skin. You say, well, I'm perfect, I put on tefillin every day, I daven, I eat kosher mit alle Sachen. The way you do it is even more important than what you do. The Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, he says that in Shabbos there are two levels in Shabbos. There's Pnimius and Chitzonius. There's the external and the internal. The external of Shabbos is the Lamites Malachas, the Malachas that you're not allowed to do. The Pnimius of Shabbos is that it is dedicated to Torah V'Aveda, to holiness. That it's a holy time, it's not wasted, it's not spent in worldly thoughts and worldly conversation, but it's spent in the holy, in Torah conversation. That's the internal of Shabbos. One does not become as aware of this until when he grows up to it and he begins to really experience Shabbos. When he begins to really experience the Shabbos, he says, yeah, how can you talk Shabbos about business? How can you talk Shabbos about, you guys don't have business, but you prepare yourselves. It's all there. Whatever it is, whether it's business or baseball, makes no difference. In other words, the more one appreciates his life and the life of Yiddishkeit, the more he becomes aware of imperfections in his own life. And this is the Tzorahs. Coming to the last point, and that is, the Torah says, what do we do with the Metzoirah? How does a Metzoirah find cure? Cure, healing. He has to be banished, mechutz lamachana. Put him outside of the camp. And there he has to be alone. And that will facilitate, will bring about that eventually he will be cured and he'll come back. What does this signify? What does this represent? The first principle of correcting, of curing its Metzoirahs is to become aware of it and to recognize it. Not to ignore it. One has to become aware. And as we said before, when he becomes aware, it doesn't mean that he has to depress himself and blame himself. He becomes aware for the purpose of finding cure, of how to correct it. He has to take it on, so to speak, head on. And the method of finding a cure for internal ills is to reflect, to have a time for oneself. To have a time for oneself, to be alone with himself and to think things through. Like the Torah says, michutz lamachana. You don't have to worry about what other people say, what other people see. And one has to have time to reflect with himself. To identify, where do I stand? Who am I? What are my pluses? What are my negatives? Chas v'sholom, nobody is here in the Metzoirah or sent out mechutz lamachana. But I'm just showing you, the Metzoirah who is mechutz lamachana, not only is he mechutz lamachana, not only is he not in town, but he's not even allowed to associate with another Metzoirah. Clearly, this is not because of Tuma, because the other Metzoirah is the same Tomei. So this not being allowed to associate with another Metzoirah means that he has to be alone to himself and find all his ills and get them out. The more one reflects privately, personally, what's called in Chassidus Aldas Atzmai. Aldas Atzmai means self-judgment, self-identification, not what other people tell me, what it looks like, but where am I personally? The more he becomes aware of the real personal ills, and it heals. That awareness itself permits it to heal. And it cleans it out and washes it out. And then he can come back like a new person. This is the message, and this is the meaning of Tazriah Metzoirah. How do you get to the point of Tazriah? You go through the cleansing of a Metzoirah. And then you get born a new person. Well, this is a continuous process. You know what continuous process? It's a continuous process. Every week is a cycle. You reach the epitome, you reach Shabbos, you reach the highest point, and then you start the week all over again. Then you reach Shabbos again. Then there's Rosh Chodesh, then there is Rosh Hashanah. There is a continuous cycle. The person is constantly growing. And he will always, if he is serious about himself, he will always be able to identify and find, oh, I never believed I had this kind of quality in me. It's shocking. I can't stand myself. What do you have to do? Realize it, identify with it, and grow out of it. Just to know it and identify, that itself cleans it out. We're in the middle of Sfiras Oimas. Sfira means you're counting. And the counting, we say that the count, so that our nefesh will become clean from its impurity. How does counting become clean? How does counting clean out our nefesh? The answer is, counting is, we count, chesed shebechesed, gvura shebechesed. Now, we mention every midah. We mention every midah, and we reflect on each one of these midas. Just to identify it already cleans it. When everything is mixed together, we don't see anything. When every day is accounted for, it's one day, a second day, a third day, that itself cleans it out. By identifying and realizing and recognizing ourselves and taking time to reflect, that itself cleans us out. If one faces up to himself and says, oh, I have jealousy in me, that's enough to start the internal process to grow out of it. To grow out of it. If he ignores it, because, I can't look at this thing, I don't want to get involved, I just want to live happily with myself. It's never going to happen. He has to isolate himself and reflect where he stands. And then the Rebbe helps each one to be successful in their own union, and we get to Vim Tahorosei, to complete purity, and they come to meet Mashiach, complete purity. All of us. Soon.
Now.
Now. Mensch. Can't hide behind.
He was doing that.
That was going. You have to be responsible for everything, for every moment of your life. It's sure. Do I have to shut off? It's
Shut off the mic.
It's a refuah because your nefesh is really healthy. This is all an external thing. And when you realize that this is ugly, that itself pushes it out. You understand? Because your nefesh, the fact that you recognize that it's ugly, that itself means, let me grow out, go further. It itself pushes it out. But you have to recognize it. If you don't recognize it, you remain there.
I was thinking about what you're saying, drawing back on the Sedra. What does it say? That when a person he identifies something on himself, so what does he do? He has to go to the Kohen, right? He has to go to his Mishpia. He has to bring it to his Mishpia and say, look at what I found on myself. What do you think about this?
That's right.
And maybe the Mishpia is going to say, this is definitely a problem. You need to go think by yourself for a while and figure out how to resolve it. Or maybe the Mishpia says, you know what? Let's keep an eye on it for a week. Come back to me in a week, and we're gonna keep an eye on it for a while.
That's right. Good.
Say, look it up.
Good. Thank you, Noah.
I don't know what the office is locked. I don't think we're.
Okay. So I should start off.
Yeah, sure.